Yeah, I can see you.
Patternerize? Is that a word? I don't know. What?
Hey guys, I'm Ashley,
I'm Mark.
I'm Nicole. I'm Maria.
I'm Tremaine.
and this is the very first episode of Behind the Design. So we created this show to create a platform for young architects and designers like yourself, or people out there who are interested in the field of architecture and design.
Yeah, we wanted to show that the major of architecture is much more than building buildings and construction.
And for people who are in high school or thinking of pursuing architecture, us as students, we want to show you the reality of being an architecture student and what you can see in studio life, the workload, and what kind of information that you'd be exposed to.
And also, this is a safe space where we introduce fun and educational topics that, talks more about the complexity of architecture.
So for our first episode, we'll be discussing the works and influence of a pretty well-known designer you may have heard of, Virgil Abloh.
As an architecture student, I had a professor that said I didn't have the pedigree or ideas or skill set to sort of work in any sort of important context. So every no is perfect for me. I thrive off a no.
Architecture and fashion, they may seem like two separate entities, but however, in more ways than one, they're actually cut from the same cloth. Today, designers like Virgil Abloh, who formerly trained as an architect, did y'all know that?
Nah, that's one of the things I wanted to talk about. I didn't even know he had a degree in architecture or a master's degree at that. So
Yeah.
I was kind of in shock. I was like, wow.
Because it looks like, from what I learned was that he was actually an engineer and that he got his master's degree in architecture. So Virgil Abloh used his training in architecture and his love of fashion to create his brand Off-White, which many people may know. And I feel as architects, we're actually trained to see the world differently, through a different lens. So what are you guys' thoughts and I guess ideas on Virgil and how he used architecture to influence fashion?
One thing I could name on top of my head is the men's fall-winter 2021 collection. He was inspired by a a residential home called Barcelona Pavilion. And that pavilion had interesting marble. Right, it was cut in specific shapes that it made it symmetrical, which is called broaching. They split the marble. And he used that inspiration as a set design for his fashion show. And I thought it was pretty cool that he used architecture and systems for his fashion show.
Especially when people think of architecture, it's always just buildings. But coming into architecture school and talking to other people and them saying that they want to use their architecture degree for set design is just something you would never think of.
Right.
It's something on a smaller scale and something you could put more conceptual thought into, rather than I'm gonna sit here at a desk job at a firm and we're gonna build these huge multi-million-dollar buildings, stuff like that. Yeah.
I know for me, I came in wanting to build buildings. That's something that I really want to do. But learning more and just researching, you realize that architecture is much more than that. Just like you said, set design is a big thing, but pretty much anything design may have been looked at by an architect.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like
fashion.
you said, Mark, I wanted to go into this just building buildings, building homes, but as I progressed in this major, I guess I kind of took up different interests like music. You have other people who are doing jewelry, fashion, things like that. So
Right.
the major really I guess it exposes you to other creative fields. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that fashion show is the perfect example of having to interact with other people, because Virgil as a studied architect, like he has to interact with poets, the guy who did the performance, he has to interact with models, other fashion designers. Like it's not just like a small vacuum or bubble that you're like participating in. You have to talk with people of all other interests as well.
Right.
So yeah.
Like going off of what you mentioned, Maria, how Virgil kind of used the Barcelona pavilion that was designed by Mies van der Rohe. He also referred to Mies as my Michael Jordan, my other Michael Jordan. And you could kind of see the comparison between, you know, him designing sneakers and then how he using that architecture, you know, language. You could see how he brings the two different forms together to create something beautiful.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because, like, in the program, they teach us to look at precedents, which are,
Every
if you don't know
time.
what precedents is, it's basically you study somebody else's work and you take details or inspirations from it to inform your own design. So it's about learning from others' mistakes or what they did right and taking those and applying them to your possible design.
Another thing, you look at other people's work, but in architecture, you know, it's a really collaborative field. Like, you're not just working by yourself, you're working with other people. And I think that's an important thing that kind of like, it kind of opens you up to like getting a different perspective on your own work as well as others. So that goes with like studying precedents and, you know, just anything.
So talking about the show I was talking about earlier, he was also inspired by a poem called Stranger in the Village by James Walden. That poem basically ties in the parallel between an African-American experience, a Swiss mountain village, and that basically ties into Virgil's fashion show and also his whole life experience. Him being an African-American in a European culture or European art is very hard to manage, and it makes you feel almost alien-like, which is his quote. So I also feel like architecture can also be seen the same way because the majority is usually Caucasian people, and it was very hard for me to imagine people like me or people like us in this type of major. And male-dominated also.
Yeah.
even like people or like types of architecture that we learn, they're usually geared towards Western cultures. Like if some professors will like venture out into a global aspect of different architectural styles, but whenever we start out, it'll always be like European or American, like colonial type. So yeah, I think that's also another thing.
I wanted to say I feel like that's why it's so important that we have diversity within architecture. So when I was applying to other architectural schools, they asked me, you know, why is it important to have diversity and different cultural perspectives in architecture? I don't know if, you know, that was a question that you guys had to answer, but, you know, at the time, I didn't really know the answer to that, you know, but it was only when I came here to school and I saw that being from a different culture, we have different viewpoints on how things are. Like me, like, you know, Maria, Nicole, we might draw a box or we might draw something, but we have different ways of explaining it. And that comes from like our cultural, you know, background, our diversity. And that's why it's so important that, you know, diversity is pushed throughout architecture. And that's why it's also important that this show, you know, really kind of break that barrier. Because when you guys were, you know, looking at architecture videos, did you see anybody who looked like us, you know, talking about it? Did you see any black females, any black architects, you know, Hispanic, like minority? Exactly. And, you know, Virgil, he broke that barrier because, you know, even though he was the creative director for Louis Vuitton, he still broke that barrier for young, you know, designers like ourselves and future designers out there. So he paved the way, I feel, for us to do what we can do today.
Personally, for me, even though I know like it's gonna be harder as a minority, it never seemed impossible. Like I wouldn't doubt myself solely based on being a minority. It'd always be based off of the work that I create. Because having people like him, like it's possible. Like it's there. The proof is there. It's possible to do. So yeah, having people like him, it just encourages you to keep going, and that nothing is impossible just because of your skin color or anything like that.
Right. And also, I think is the fact that he made streetwear so mainstream. He didn't change himself at all. Like you would think like, oh, now that I'm in this European West like type of thinking that, oh, I guess I have to change the way I create. But no, he stuck to his guns, and I think that also applies to us. Like, we do have all different types of designs, and it ventures differently from your classmates. But whatever you feel confident and happy with is what you should go with, and rather focusing on what your other classmates are doing. So I think that's also important to keep in mind. As a creator, just be confident in yourself and go with the flow and really know your intuition, because everybody's intuition is different depending how they grew up and what they create.
That's another thing. Like, it brings me to a quote that he said. I don't remember off the dome, but it says, "I'm always trying to prove to my 17-year-old self that I can be creative and do things that I thought were possible." Like, I think that's really important. You know, he's not trying to please anybody else but himself, or like his younger self. And going into this major, like, I guess you kind of lose some of your passions like along the way, because you just get so like used to doing things a certain way. From like certain you just get used to doing things like by the book, I guess, like this structured method. But really, like, I just say, really don't please anybody else. Like, you're doing this for you, like you're designing, like,
Yeah, I completely agree with that quote, because, you know, from year one in architecture, you learn these transferable skills that you can apply to basically any other, like Tramel mentioned, any other career, you know, whether it be animation, advertising, commercial design, set design. You learn these skills that, you know, you can apply anywhere. And, you know, like I mentioned earlier in the video, architecture, we're taught to look at the world differently. We're taught to think differently. So you don't have to be an architect and design buildings. I mean, I feel like architecture is not, I don't think it's important to design buildings. It's important to impact a space, and you don't have to do that through designing a skyscraper. You know, we save that for the engineers. You know, we're trying to show how our design impact people's lives and emotions, and that's not always through a building.
Just what Ashley was saying about how architecture doesn't have to be solely architecture. Virgil, for one of his collections, actually used the rendering of buildings of a certain place and embedded it into a puffer jacket.
He's basically taking two design ideas or like fields and merging them together. And I think that's important. Like, architecture, people think of it as one thing, but you're merging architecture and fashion. Like, I don't know anybody that's done that. Like, that's crazy.
A wearable cityscape. Like, I can't imagine having like the Eiffel Tower and like walking like this, but he did it, and it's all about pushing boundaries.
Yeah, and maybe it's not about like functionality, but it's just about the statement it makes.
Yeah. Architecture is also like creating spaces, and the way he did his fashion set design is he put trees. I think it was his last fashion show. Yeah, he put trees all over the runway, which has never been done before because usually runways are straight, flat. But he put it there so people could actually analyze how the clothes move through movement. Because when you're walking down a fashion show as a model, models were basically walking stiff, so it doesn't really technically show how the clothes actually move. But he utilized those obstacles to basically see how clothes can actually move throughout the space. And I think that's pretty interesting because as architects, we also don't create the outside. We also create the inside and how that impacts the space too.
One thing I was inspired by was the fact that Virgil Abloh, he made album covers. I didn't really know that. Like, I thought he was just into furniture and just architecture, fashion design, all that. But he actually made an album cover for one of my favorite artists, Kid Cudi. It was the Wizard album. I know he's also done album covers for Kanye, for Jay-Z, for even A$AP Rocky, I believe. And I just think that's like cool. Like, he's really taken everything that he's learned from whether it's architecture or just years of being in the design field and translating it into other things like album covers, you know? Like, I think that's sick.
So one of Virgil's favorite types of architectural styles is deconstructivism, and it's basically a postmodern architectural style characterized by fragmentation and manipulation of a structure of a surface, and this can be shown in his works like Off-White and also in his collabs with the Nike brand. In terms of his ghosting collection and his revealing collection, like, He basically focuses on the materiality of the shoe, which is also something that we would do in architecture, focusing on what can be paired together, what we want to basically reveal. And yeah, I think that's really cool. That's another way that he connected architecture within his fashion as well.
That's a really good point, because like I read in one of the articles, it said like Virgil's fashion really transformed the fashion industry itself. Like in terms of like the past few years, like when we grew up in high school and middle school, they were always talking about Off-White and all the different designers. So even if you couldn't get them at the time, you kind of knew about them. Exactly. And then maybe wanted you to made you want to go research, or maybe find out how you could be a designer, you know?
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes by Virgil is, for me, design is about whatever I find is worthy to tell a story about. And, you know, I feel like, once again, it can relate back to architecture because we are telling a story about a space. When we talk to clients, when we do have a critique, you know, we're conveying emotions, not only through the buildings, but the way we present a story. And I really like that because he clearly told his story through his, like Tramel mentioned, he did like design covers, fashion designs. You know, he was the creative director for Kanye West also. He told his story through design, and that's something that will stick with me.
My name is Mahari Kit. I'm a third-year architecture major, and I go to Kennesaw State University. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, East Flatbush. If you from Flatbush, you already know the vibe. But my family is Guyanese, we're Caribbean, so I grew up in a very Caribbean household. My community is very Caribbean. Everybody I've known growing up is Caribbean, so yeah. Being Caribbean, I would say it goes into the way that I do architecture, but not necessarily like my design process, because I feel like growing up Caribbean, like you're forced to be very disciplined. So when it comes to like schoolwork, I'm on it because of that. I was influenced to pursue architecture just because of my love for math and art. They were both my favorite subjects in middle school and high school, and I was really good at math. So I wanted to combine my art skills with math, and I took a program in 10th and 11th grade at a college called Cooper Union, where I was able to be exposed to architecture. We were literally in the studio, so I got that firsthand since high school, and I really liked it, so I just decided to apply for college for architecture. I think diversity is very important in architecture because everybody on this planet is from somewhere else. Like everybody comes from different walks of life. So as designers, we have to prepare for that, and we have to make sure that we understand different cultures and different types of people. My design process, I usually start with sketching. I think me being like exposed to art and being a painter, I always start with sketching, and then I go into like a concept idea or something that I want to emulate throughout my design. This semester I started off looking at plants and nature, and I wanted that very free form and organic shapes throughout my design. So I start with the sketch of it, I look at a concept, and then I start designing further from there. Virgil has inspired me in like every way possible. I'm an architecture student, but I'm also a painter. I have a YouTube channel. I just do a lot of creative things like outside of school, and he showed me as a person that you can be very creative in different ways, but you can combine them together and be successful at all of them. He was a DJ, he was an architect, he was an engineer, a fashion designer, and those seem like completely different things. But when you think about it, like a creator is a creator. Like you can find ways to intertwine everything. And I like the fact that architecture is a very interdisciplinary major. So I see how I can bring my paintings in. I see how I can bring my love for film and photography in. So he really just inspired me on how to combine everything and not think that you have to limit yourself, because people make it seem like you have to, but you really don't. Advice that I would give to upcoming architects or like architecture students, I would say find what inspires you. Like, and that could be anything, but architecture, sometimes it feels very narrow, but it's really an open major. You can really do a lot with it. So find what inspires you and find what you like and what you want to go into. And I feel like that would inform a lot of your decisions while you're in school. Like your design decisions, you would think about like, okay, I want to design for kids, and your designs would kind of like, you know, emulate that. So I definitely think find what inspires you, and also just, I don't know, be focused and don't limit yourself. That's another thing. Don't let people tell you what you can't do, because architecture, you will break down a lot, but just remind yourself why you want to be here, and if you know what inspires you, that will push you to keep going. My favorite project that I've worked on so far has been a hospice/respiratory care center for kids that we worked on last semester. I enjoyed it because it was like, it felt very much like a real life project. Like, I had to study the lives of these kids, or like the potential kids, and like how would the space affect them with the different issues that they may have. So that was my favorite project. I just liked the fact that I had to really think and really do a lot of research, which I know I would have to do in the field. Designing the hospice/respiratory care center, it was something that it was a very interesting project. We started off with a quote from a poet named Rumi. He was a Persian poet, and then we turned it into an like abstract painting. My painting was basically two hearts being intersected. So the idea of intersection and overlapping was something I tried to keep throughout my project, and I used strings, so it was very angular, so I also wanted to keep that. So going into the design process for the house, I used very angular shapes. I just started off with triangles, and then I started making more usable spaces. And I kept the project pretty simple, only because I knew it would be for people who aren't able to inhabit the space as much as they would want to. But my favorite part of the project was in the center, in the outside. I created an art installation. I wanted to make something that would be very engaging to the kids there, and they would be able to interact with it, even just visually. So that was my favorite part about that, and coming up with that idea was just based off of my love for art. So my favorite project that I've worked on outside of school was last summer. I created a brand. I started a tote bag brand / just my first venture into fashion, combining my paintings with fashion. So it was based off of my hometown, Brooklyn, New York, and it was called Concrete Jungle. And that was just, I don't know, I just really enjoyed bringing something very like authentic to my culture. Like, I really enjoyed bringing that and being able to sell that to people and seeing different people wear my bag. I just enjoyed it. With my architecture degree, I plan on designing really everything. I do want to go into fashion, but I do also want to continue painting. I want to do pavilions. I want to do art installations, skyscrapers, really anything. I just like designing, and I like creating in general. So I really want to do everything. Like, going back to Virgil, I see how he was able to do so much, and I want to be very similar to that. Studio culture is very tentative. It depends on who's in your class. It depends on who's your teacher. It's not something that like is very like, oh, it's gonna be like this. Every semester is something different. The different people that are in your class will determine like how studio culture is. I'm very like closed in sometimes, so I really don't talk in studio. But when it's people in your class that really open you up to like talking to people, then you will talk. So it's like, studio is very different every semester, but I enjoy it. I like being able to collaborate with people even when we're doing independent projects, being able to ask for advice, but also give advice, and you just get inspired when you see people around you doing the same thing as you, but in a different way. COVID has impacted my college experience because it definitely took my freshman semester away from me. But I'm still alive, my family's still alive, so we just give thanks for being alive. But it pushed learning back, because first year you're very hands-on and drawing, and then second year you switch to digital and being on a computer. But it's hard to learn a software over a software. So learning virtual was very hard, but I don't know, coming back for third year, like being all fully in person, it's been fine. You just gotta adjust and adapt, so it's been fine. Okay, so to follow me, you can follow me on Instagram. I have 2 Instagram pages, Saucy Kid Hari and Mahari Kid. Mahari Kid is my brand page for my art, so you can follow me on there. You can follow my YouTube channel, well, subscribe to my YouTube channel at Saucy Kid Hari. On YouTube, I really do like lifestyle kind of stuff. I'm trying to bring in my art. I've done a painting on there, one video of me painting a jacket, but I am trying to bring in more, so I'm just doing lifestyle vlogs, challenges on there right now. but I'm open to anything.
Anything?
Not anything. But I'm open to ideas. So yeah.
This concludes the first episode of Behind the Design.
We hope you guys.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned for the next episode. Like, comment, subscribe below. Any future designers out there, keep on pursuing. Y'all got this. Keep on fighting. This is Behind the Design. Stay cool, stay frosty.
So as you can tell, we were very nervous.
That was all the questions.
Does that play into your architecture?
Nah, you going crazy right now. Oh, I think you should cover your ears. I was like,